Right now, as the world around you grows still, something extraordinary is beginning inside your skull. While your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slows, an entire universe of activity is awakening, not outside, but within. Your brain, that soft, folded organ weighing little more than 3 pounds, is preparing for one of the most remarkable performances in all of nature. Tonight, it will sort through the fragments of your day, strengthen the memories worth keeping, dissolve the ones that no longer serve you, and quietly repair itself in ways that science is only beginning to understand. Tonight, we explore what your brain does while you sleep, the hidden rituals, the silent conversations between neurons, and the delicate processes that unfold in the darkness of each passing hour. It is a journey into the most private theater of your existence, where the self is both audience and actor. Welcome to Drowsy Discovery. Over the next 2 hours, over 100 gentle facts will drift through your mind like clouds moving across a moonlit sky. There is nothing to memorize, nothing to remember. Just listen and let your mind drift. Have you ever wondered what happens behind your closed eyelids in the hours you cannot recall? You are not alone. If these facts bring you peace tonight, consider leaving a like or perhaps subscribing, so we can continue creating these sleepy journeys for curious minds everywhere. Now let your shoulders drop just a little. Let the weight of the day slip from your body. If it feels right, take one slow breath in and let it go. Feel the bed beneath you, the stillness around you. Let us begin. Your brain does not simply switch off when you fall asleep. When your eyelids finally close and the waking world fades from awareness, the brain does not power down like a machine at the end of a long shift, but instead transitions into a different mode of operation, one that is equally complex and in many ways even more mysterious than the activity of waking hours. For while you lie still beneath the covers, billions of neurons continue their ceaseless conversations. Electrical signals ripple through networks that span from the base of your skull to the folds of your cortex, and entire systems that were busy processing the external world now turn inward, tending to tasks of repair and reorganization, of sorting and strengthening, of cleansing and creation. And this nightly transformation is so profound that it reshapes who you will be when morning arrives. Rest is not emptiness, but a different kind of presence. Sleep is divided into distinct stages, each with its own purpose. Throughout the night, the sleeping brain moves through a carefully orchestrated sequence of stages, each serving a different function and producing its own characteristic patterns of electrical activity. And these stages are not random, but follow a predictable architecture, cycling from light sleep through deeper states before rising again toward the vivid theater of dreams. And each passage through this cycle takes roughly 90 minutes, repeating 4 or 5 times before morning arrives. And within this rhythm, some stages are devoted to physical restoration, while others focus on memory and emotion, and the brain navigates this landscape with remarkable precision and timing, allocating time and resources according to needs that shift as the night progresses and dawn approaches. Every stage has its own essential work to complete. The first stage of sleep lasts only a few minutes, but sets everything in motion. The journey into sleep begins with a brief passage through a transitional state that bridges wakefulness and true slumber. A few gentle minutes during which the brain waves start to ease from the rapid, irregular rhythms of alert consciousness into slower, more synchronized patterns that signal the approach of deeper rest. And in this fleeting stage, muscles may twitch involuntarily as the body releases accumulated tension. Sounds become dreamy and distorted, and thoughts drift in strange and wandering directions. And though it occupies only a small portion of the night, this opening movement is essential, a gradual dimming of the lights that allows the theater of sleep to begin without jarring transitions. easing the mind gently from one world into another, preparing the neural landscape for the deeper stages that will follow in the hours ahead. The descent is soft but purposeful. Your brain waves begin to slow as you drift from wakefulness into rest. The electrical activity of the brain can be measured and recorded as a series of waves, each pattern corresponding to a different state of consciousness. And as you begin to fall asleep, the fast, irregular waves of wakefulness give way to slower, more rhythmic oscillations that spread across the cortex in gentle pulses, a shift that reflects the loosening grip of attention and focus. And these slower waves are not a sign of weakness, but rather a different kind of organization. One in which millions of neurons begin to fire in unison rather than independently, creating the conditions necessary for the tasks that sleep alone can accomplish. And the further you descend through the stages, the slower and larger these waves become, until they reach the majestic rolling delta rhythms of the deepest sleep. The rhythm slows so that work may begin. During light sleep, your muscles relax and your heart rate begins to fall. As the brain eases into the shallower stages of sleep, the body follows in kind, muscles releasing the tension accumulated during waking hours, and the heart settling into a calmer rhythm that reflects the reduced demands of a resting state. And breathing becomes more regular and deeper, blood pressure dips gently, and the metabolic furnace that powers every movement and thought turns down its flame to conserve energy for the restorative processes ahead. And this relaxation is not uniform but progresses gradually, the jaw loosening, the shoulders dropping, the hands uncurling, until the body lies in a state of peaceful surrender that allows sleep to deepen without interruption. And though you are no longer conscious of these changes, they are happening nonetheless. A quiet unwinding that clears the way for the more profound rest that awaits in the stages to come. The body softens before the mind can fully let go. Sleep spindles appear in your brain, brief bursts of activity that protect your rest. Scattered throughout the lighter stages of sleep are sudden bursts of high-frequency electrical activity that last only a second or two, but appear on recordings as distinctive waveforms called sleep spindles. And these brief flurries are generated by a loop of communication between the thalamus and the cortex, a conversation that seems to serve multiple purposes, one of which is to dampen the brain's responsiveness to external stimuli so that you are less likely to be awakened by passing sounds. And another is to facilitate the transfer of memories from temporary storage to more permanent networks. And studies have shown that people who produce more spindles often perform better on memory tasks the following day, their rest having done its protective and consolidating work more thoroughly. Protection and learning arrive together. And as these early stages settle into place, the brain begins its descent into something deeper, a territory where the conscious mind cannot follow. Deep sleep is when the brain produces slow, rolling delta waves. In the deepest stages of sleep, the brain's electrical activity shifts into a pattern unlike anything seen during wakefulness. Immense slow waves called delta waves that sweep across the cortex in rhythmic pulses lasting nearly a full second each. And these majestic oscillations represent the most synchronized state the brain ever achieves, millions of neurons firing and falling silent in unison like a vast choir breathing together. And the emergence of delta waves signals that the brain has descended to its most restorative level, the place where growth hormone surges and the immune system receives its boost. And as these waves roll through your sleeping mind, they carry a quality of rest that lighter stages cannot provide, deep structural maintenance that affects everything from muscle tissue to mood. Delta is the foundation of renewal. During deep sleep, it becomes remarkably difficult to wake someone. When the brain settles into its deepest stages, the threshold for arousal rises dramatically, and sounds that would have startled you awake during lighter phases now fail to penetrate the barrier of unconsciousness. And even if someone shakes your shoulder repeatedly, you may respond only sluggishly or not at all, as though trapped beneath the surface of a warm, dark sea. And this insensitivity is not a flaw, but a feature, the brain's way of protecting the most important phase of sleep from interruption. Guarding the precious window during which growth hormone floods the body and cellular repair proceeds at its most efficient pace. And anyone who has been woken from deep sleep knows the confusion and disorientation that follows, the mind taking long moments to surface from those hidden depths, the waking world feeling strange and unfamiliar until full awareness gradually returns. The fortress guards its treasures. The body releases growth hormone almost exclusively during deep sleep. While you rest in the deepest stages of slumber, a surge of growth hormone flows from the pituitary gland into your bloodstream, reaching levels that remain low or absent during most waking hours. And this hormone is essential not only for children who are still growing taller, but for adults who rely upon it to repair damaged tissues, build lean muscle, strengthen bones, and metabolize fat. And the timing of this release is so closely tied to deep sleep that disrupting these stages can significantly reduce the amount produced each night, potentially affecting recovery from exercise, wound healing, and even the gradual appearance of the skin over time. And this connection between sleep and growth is one of the clearest examples of how the body uses the silent hours to accomplish tasks that simply cannot be done while awake and alert. The deepest rest yields the richest harvest. Tissue repair and muscle growth happen while you are deeply unconscious. Throughout the day, your body accumulates tiny damages, microtears in muscle fibers stressed by movement and cells worn down by the demands of metabolism. And it is during deep sleep that the repair crews arrive in force, summoned by the hormonal signals that peak in these quiet hours, and the proteins that knit muscle fibers back together are synthesized most efficiently when the body is at rest and energy can be diverted fully toward rebuilding rather than powering active movement and thought. And this is why athletes who neglect their sleep often plateau in their training, despite their dedication and effort, their bodies simply unable to recover fast enough to make full use of the stimulus they have provided during their demanding waking hours of exertion and daily physical practice. The body builds itself in the dark. Your immune system strengthens itself during the hours of deep rest. As you drift through the deepest stages of sleep, your immune system enters a heightened state of activity, producing and deploying cells that seek out and destroy pathogens efficiently, releasing signaling molecules called cytokines that coordinate the defense against infection, and forming the immunological memories that allow the body to recognize threats. And studies have shown that people who sleep poorly are significantly more susceptible to colds and other common illnesses. Their immune response is sluggish compared to those who enjoy full nights of rest, and even a single night of insufficient sleep can reduce the effectiveness of vaccinations, the body's defenses less able to learn from the introduced antigens when deprived of the restorative hours it needs, leaving you more vulnerable to the invisible threats that surround us each day. Sleep trains the soldiers that protect you from invisible threats. Deep sleep is essential for physical recovery after exertion. After a day of intense exercise or heavy labor, the body craves deep sleep specifically, the stage during which hormonal signals and metabolic conditions align to maximize the repair and strengthening of tissues pushed beyond their comfortable limits. And this is why elite athletes guard their sleep as jealously as they guard their training routines, understanding that the gains made in the gym or on the track are consolidated in the bedroom. The muscles rebuilding during hours of unconsciousness to emerge stronger than before. And even for those who exercise moderately or engage in ordinary daily physical work, The quality of deep sleep influences how quickly soreness fades and how ready the body feels to face another round of demands each morning when dawn returns. The body asks for darkness so that it may rise stronger and more capable. Yet the brain's work during sleep is not only physical, it is profoundly mental, shaping the very architecture of your thoughts. Memory consolidation is one of the brain's most important nocturnal tasks. Throughout the waking hours, your brain absorbs far more information than it can permanently store, and this flood of sensory impressions, facts, skills, and experiences must be sorted and organized before it can become part of your lasting memory. And this crucial process of consolidation happens primarily during sleep, when the brain can devote its full resources to reviewing what has been learned, deciding what is worth keeping, and integrating new knowledge with what already exists. And without adequate sleep, memories remain fragile, easily disrupted, or simply fading before they ever had a chance to solidify. And this is why students who stay up all night studying often perform worse than those who allow themselves proper sleep. Their memories never properly stabilized or woven into lasting networks. Sleep is the glue that holds memory together. The hippocampus replays the day's experiences during sleep. Tucked deep within the temporal lobes lies a curved structure called the hippocampus, essential for forming new memories and navigating through space. And during sleep, this region becomes remarkably active, replaying in compressed form the experiences of the day just past, patterns of neural firing that first occurred while you were awake running again through the same circuits at accelerated speeds, almost as though the brain were watching a sped-up film of what you did and saw and learned during your waking hours. And this replay is believed to strengthen the connections between neurons involved in those experiences, gradually transferring information from the temporary storage of the hippocampus to the more permanent and stable networks of the cortex, where they can be accessed for years to come whenever those memories are needed. The hippocampus dreams forward by dreaming backward. Short-term memories are transferred to long-term storage while you rest. When you first learn something new, whether it is a person's name or the steps of a dance or the meaning of a foreign word, that information exists only in a fragile short-term form, easily overwritten by the next thing that demands your attention. And the transformation from this temporary state into something lasting and durable requires a process of stabilization that unfolds over hours and days, with sleep serving as the most critical window. The time when the brain shifts memories from the hippocampus to the vast networks of the cortex, where they can be integrated with existing knowledge and accessed for years or even decades to come. And this transfer is selective, influenced by emotional significance, relevance, and thoughtful repetition over time. The journey from fleeting moment to forever memory takes place in silence. And as these thoughts settle, there is no need to hold on to any of them. Let them pass through you like a slow current. Take a breath if you wish, and let your body sink a little deeper into the stillness. The brain decides which memories to keep and which to let fade. Not every moment of your waking life deserves a place in permanent memory, and so the brain must act as a curator, selecting from the flood of daily experience those fragments that are most relevant or most likely to be useful in the future. And much of this editing happens during sleep, when neural activity strengthens some connections while allowing others to weaken and eventually dissolve, a process that ensures the storage capacity of the brain is not overwhelmed by trivia. And this is why you may forget what you had for lunch on an ordinary Tuesday, yet remember a single sentence spoken at just the right moment years ago, the emotional weight of that moment flagging it for careful preservation, while countless other details simply fade away into the quiet darkness of forgetting. Memory is not about saving everything, but about saving what matters. Emotionally significant memories are more likely to be preserved. Events that carry a strong emotional charge, whether joyful or frightening, tend to be encoded more deeply and retained more stubbornly than neutral experiences. A phenomenon rooted in the way the amygdala, the brain's center for processing emotion, interacts with the hippocampus during both encoding and consolidation. And during sleep, this partnership continues, the emotionally tagged memories receiving preferential treatment as the brain replays and strengthens the neural patterns that represent them. And this bias makes evolutionary sense, for remembering the location of danger or the face of a loved one is far more important for survival than recalling the pattern of clouds on a forgotten afternoon. And this is why certain precious moments from years ago remain vivid, while entire ordinary weeks have faded into nothing at all. The heart tells the brain what to remember. Sleep helps weaken unnecessary neural connections through synaptic pruning. Every day the brain accumulates new synaptic connections as it learns and adapts, but if these connections only ever grew stronger, the networks would eventually become saturated, losing the flexibility needed to encode new information. And so sleep serves a complementary purpose, not only strengthening important connections, but also weakening and eliminating those that are no longer needed, a process often called synaptic pruning or downscaling. And this overnight editing ensures that the brain remains efficient, agile, and capable of distinguishing what matters from what does not. And research suggests that without adequate restful sleep, this pruning is impaired, leaving the brain cluttered with information that interferes with thinking clearly and learning properly and navigating the complexities of daily life. Clearing away makes room for what comes next. From the careful curation of memory, the brain enters a stranger realm, one where logic bends and images appear unbidden. REM sleep is when most vivid dreaming occurs. As the sleeping brain cycles through its nightly stages, it eventually enters a phase so distinct from all others that it was once thought to be a separate form of consciousness altogether. And this is the stage known as rapid eye movement or REM sleep, during which the sleeper's eyes dart back and forth beneath closed lids, and the brain erupts into activity patterns nearly indistinguishable from wakefulness. And it is here, in this paradoxical state of mental wakefulness and physical stillness, that the most vivid and story-like dreams unfold, narratives populated by faces both familiar and strange, settings that shift without logic, and emotions that can linger into the hours that follow after waking. And while every stage of sleep may produce some imagery, the elaborate plots and sensory richness of REM dreams set them apart from all other sleep experiences. The theater opens when the body cannot move. Your eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids during REM. The distinctive feature that gives REM sleep its name is the swift, jerky motion of the eyes behind closed eyelids, movements that can be detected by electrodes placed around the eye sockets and that distinguish this stage from all others. And though scientists still debate whether these movements correspond directly to the visual content of dreams, as if the sleeper were scanning a dream landscape, or serve some other function entirely, there is no doubt that they mark a unique neurological state. One in which the visual centers of the brain are highly active despite the absence of any external light, and watching a sleeper during REM can be startling, the eyes fluttering beneath their lids, as though following a drama invisible to anyone else, a private cinema playing to an audience of one, and these rapid movements recur with every REM episode throughout the night. The eyes see what no one else can see. The brain becomes almost as active during REM as when you are awake. If you were to measure the electrical activity of the brain during REM sleep without knowing what stage the sleeper was in, you might easily conclude that the person was fully awake and engaged with the world. For the patterns of neural firing closely resemble those of an alert, attentive mind engaged with its waking environment. And this high level of activity supports the rich perceptual experiences of dreaming, the brain generating images, sounds, emotions, and narratives without any input from the external environment, constructing a complete reality from memory and imagination alone. And yet, despite this internal intensity, the body remains profoundly relaxed and still, held motionless by protective mechanisms that prevent dream actions from becoming physical movements in the real world outside the theater of sleep. Activity hides beneath the stillness. Your body is temporarily paralyzed during REM to prevent you from acting out dreams. Whenever the brain enters REM sleep, a signal travels down from the brainstem to inhibit the motor neurons that control your voluntary muscles, effectively paralyzing nearly everything below the neck, so that the flailing and running that might accompany your vivid dreams remain safely confined to the theater of the mind. And this mechanism, known as REM atonia, is a protective gift of evolution, preventing sleepers from injuring themselves by physically responding to dream content. And if you have ever awoken during a dream and found yourself unable to move even for a few frightening seconds, you have experienced a fragment of this paralysis lingering past its usual boundary into those first disorienting moments of wakefulness, caught between two worlds before the body releases you back to full awareness. The body is firmly anchored so that the mind may wander freely. This paralysis is controlled by a small region near the brainstem. The command center for REM paralysis lies in a cluster of neurons tucked within a region near the brainstem called the subcoeruleus area. And when this area becomes active during REM sleep, it sends inhibitory signals down the spinal cord that silence the motor neurons responsible for moving your arms, legs, and trunk, cutting the line of communication between brain and muscle so completely that even the most vigorous dream of running or climbing leaves the body utterly still. And when this important region is damaged or malfunctions, the consequences can be dramatic. Sleepers kicking, punching, or leaping in response to their dreams, a condition known as REM sleep behavior disorder that reveals just how essential this small but crucial neural cluster truly is for keeping us safely anchored during our nightly journeys through the dream world. Control resides in a carefully guarded handful of cells. Without REM paralysis, sleepers would physically move through their dreams. In the rare cases where the brainstem mechanisms that produce REM atonia fail, the dreaming brain retains its connection to the muscles, and the sleeper begins to act out their dreams physically in the real world, rising from bed to walk, throwing punches at imagined assailants, or leaping to catch objects that exist only in the dream world, behaviors that can pose a real risk of injury to both the sleeper and anyone sharing the bed. And research studies of this condition have shown that the movements often correspond closely to what the person reports dreaming, confirming that our dreams truly are physical experiences to the brain, vivid motor patterns held in check only by the nightly paralysis that descends each time REM sleep arrives and releases the dreamer into stillness. The barrier between dream and action is thinner than you might think. And within this stillness of the body, the mind roams free through landscapes that exist nowhere but in the folds of your imagination. Dreams may serve as emotional rehearsals for waking life. One prominent theory of why we dream proposes that the scenarios played out behind closed eyes function as emotional simulations, allowing the sleeping brain to rehearse responses to situations it might encounter when awake, practicing for danger and exploring social conflicts without the consequences of real-world failure. And from this perspective, even nightmares have their quiet value, preparing the mind for threats by running through frightening scenarios in a safe context where no actual harm can occur. And this rehearsal hypothesis helps explain why dreams so often feature intense emotions and dramatic situations rather than mundane routine, the sleeping mind drawn to conflict and challenge, because these are the scenarios most worth practicing before they arrive in waking life outside of sleep. The stage is set each night for invisible practice. The brain processes difficult emotions through the stories it tells itself at night. When the day has brought distressing experiences or unresolved feelings, the brain often revisits them during REM sleep, weaving fragments of memory and emotion into narrative sequences that serve as internal processing. And researchers have found that REM sleep helps to soothe the emotional sting of painful memories, chemically bathing the brain in conditions that allow reprocessing to occur without the full force of stress hormones that would accompany the same memories when recalled during waking hours. And this overnight therapy may explain why we instinctively advise troubled friends to sleep on their problems, for the dreaming brain has a way of reorganizing emotional material that conscious effort cannot replicate, and by morning, what seemed unbearable may feel at least a little more manageable, a little less sharp. The night absorbs what the day cannot hold. REM sleep is linked to creativity and problem-solving. Something about the loosened logic of REM sleep allows the brain to make connections it might otherwise miss, combining ideas in ways that feel impossible during wakefulness, when attention is focused and categories are rigid. And this is why artists, musicians, and scientists have so often spoken of creative breakthroughs arriving during or shortly after sleep. Insights that seem to come from nowhere, but in truth emerged from the uninhibited associative play of the dreaming mind working through the night. And experiments have confirmed that people who sleep after being presented with a problem are more likely to find novel and unexpected solutions than those who stay awake for the same period, suggesting that REM sleep actively and substantially contributes to creative cognition and problem solving. The looseness of dreams is a gift to waking thought and creative endeavor. Many artists and scientists have found profound and significant answers to problems in their dreams. The history of creative discovery is dotted with remarkable stories of insights arriving in dreams, from the chemist who envisioned the ring structure of benzene coiling like a snake, biting its own tail, to the composer who heard melodies he later carefully transcribed upon waking in the early morning hours. And while these accounts are sometimes embellished with the passage of time, the consistent theme across centuries and cultures suggests that the dreaming brain possesses capacities the waking mind does not. Capacities for pattern recognition and lateral association that flourish when the critical faculties relax, and countless inventors, writers, and mathematicians have reported solving stubborn problems only after setting them aside for the night, trusting the unconscious mind to carry the work forward while they sleep. Genius sometimes whispers in the quiet of sleep. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, is less active during dreaming. The prefrontal cortex is the region of the brain most responsible for rational thought, critical judgment, and the ability to distinguish possible from impossible. And during REM sleep, this region quiets dramatically, its usual oversight diminishing to a murmur. And this reduction in prefrontal activity helps explain why dreams feel so real in the moment, why you can accept flying through the air or meeting long-dead relatives without question, only recognizing the absurdity once you wake. And the relaxation of logical constraints also allows the brain to explore combinations and scenarios it would dismiss as foolish while awake, a looseness that may be essential for the creative benefits of dreaming, permitting the unconscious to play without the interference of the internal critic. Logic steps aside so that imagination may roam. This is why dreams often feel strange, yet completely normal in the moment. While you dream, you rarely question the bizarre rules of the dream world, accepting talking animals, sudden changes of location, and impossible physics, as though they were the most natural things in existence. And this unquestioning acceptance arises from the reduced activity of the brain regions that normally maintain your sense of logical coherence, leaving you without the tools to recognize inconsistency or wonder how you arrived where you are. And only upon waking does the full strangeness of the experience become apparent, the waking mind reasserting its usual standards and finding the dream world wanting, absurd by any measure that matters during the day, yet in the moment of dreaming it, all made perfect sense. And this strange normalcy of the dream state is one of its most defining characteristics. Absurdity becomes invisible to the sleeping eye. While the dreaming mind wanders through impossible places, the body below is undergoing quiet transformations of its own. The glymphatic system activates during sleep to cleanse the brain. Hidden within the architecture of the brain lies a cleaning system that remained undetected for centuries, a network of channels that activates primarily during sleep to flush away the metabolic waste accumulated during waking hours. And this system, named the glymphatic system for its reliance on glial cells, pumps cerebrospinal fluid through the spaces around blood vessels and deep into the brain tissue, washing through the narrow gaps between cells and carrying toxins away like a tide carrying debris from a beach. And this nightly cleanse is so important that cutting sleep short may leave harmful substances lingering in the brain, substances that have been linked to neurodegenerative diseases when they accumulate over time. And this discovery has transformed our understanding of why sleep is not optional but essential, a nightly bath that keeps the brain functioning clearly. The brain washes itself while you rest. Brain cells shrink during sleep, allowing fluid to wash between them. When you fall asleep, a remarkable transformation occurs at the cellular level, with neurons and the supporting glial cells shrinking by as much as 60%, and this contraction widens the interstitial spaces between them, opening channels through which cerebrospinal fluid can flow more freely than it could during wakefulness. And this increased flow is what allows the glymphatic system to perform its cleansing function efficiently, sweeping away the byproducts of cellular activity that built up throughout the day. And the brain seems to understand that it cannot both process the world and clean itself at the same time. So it separates these tasks, devoting waking hours to perception and thought, and sleeping hours to repair and maintenance, a division of labor that has evolved over millions of years. The cells make room so that cleaning may proceed unhindered. Toxins and metabolic waste are flushed from the brain overnight. Every moment that your neurons fire and communicate, they produce waste, broken proteins, and spent molecules that must be removed, or they will accumulate and interfere with proper function. And the brain lacks the lymphatic vessels that carry waste away from other organs, relying instead on the glymphatic pathways that operate most effectively during sleep. And among the substances cleared are fragments of proteins that in excess become toxic. Debris from the intense metabolic activity of a brain that consumes more energy per gram than any other organ. And when sleep is sufficient, this waste is efficiently removed, leaving the brain refreshed and renewed and ready for another day with improved clarity and focus. But when sleep is curtailed, the removal remains incomplete and the residue lingers. The night carries away what the day leaves behind. Beta amyloid, a protein linked to Alzheimer's, is cleared during deep sleep. Among the waste products removed by the glymphatic system is a protein fragment called beta amyloid, which in small amounts is harmless, but in excess clumps together into plaques found in the brains of those with Alzheimer's disease. And studies have shown that the clearance of beta amyloid is most efficient during the deepest stages of sleep, when brain waves are slow and the glymphatic channels are wide open. And individuals who consistently get less deep sleep show higher accumulations of this protein over time, raising the troubling possibility that chronic sleep deprivation may contribute to neurodegenerative risk. And this discovery has transformed how scientists think about the long-term consequences of sleeplessness, suggesting that each night of quality rest is an investment in cognitive clarity and resilience. Deep sleep may be a defense against the shadows of age. Poor sleep may contribute to the accumulation of harmful brain proteins. Night after night of insufficient or disrupted sleep means night after night of incomplete cleaning, waste products left to linger where they do not belong, settling into the delicate architecture of the brain like sediment in a neglected pond. And over years, these small deficits may compound, each night's residue adding to the last, until the accumulation begins to interfere with function in ways that may not become apparent for decades. And this is why scientists now view sleep not merely as a comfort, but as a long-term investment in cognitive health, a nightly maintenance routine that pays dividends far into the future, since those who treat sleep as an afterthought may be quietly borrowing against their own clarity of mind, with interest that compounds silently across the years. The cost of neglect is slow but certain. The glymphatic system is most active during the slowest stages of sleep. Although the glymphatic system can function to some degree during wakefulness and lighter sleep stages, its activity reaches a peak during the deepest, slowest phases of non-REM sleep, when delta waves roll through the brain and the body is most profoundly at rest. And this timing is no coincidence. For the same conditions that produce delta waves, the synchronization of vast neural networks and the reduction of external sensory processing also allow for optimal and efficient glymphatic flow. The brain devoting its energy to internal housekeeping rather than external engagement, and this is yet another reason why deep sleep is so valuable, why skipping it or fragmenting it through alarms and interruptions may have consequences that extend far beyond simple tiredness. The deepest rest enables the deepest and most thorough cleaning. And as the brain cleanses itself, a silent rhythm continues to pulse through every cell, the ancient clock that governs when we wake and when we rest. The circadian rhythm controls your natural sleep-wake cycle. Deep within your biology runs an internal clock that has been ticking since before you were born, a rhythm close to 24 hours in length that governs not only when you feel sleepy and when you feel alert, but also the precise timing of hormone release, body temperature fluctuations, metabolic rate, and countless other physiological processes. And this circadian rhythm is not a metaphor, but a measurable pattern embedded in nearly every cell of your body. Orchestrated by a master pacemaker in the brain that synchronizes the whole system like a conductor keeping an orchestra in time. And when this rhythm is disrupted by shift work, jet lag, or irregular schedules, the consequences ripple outward to mood, cognition, digestion, and your overall health and well-being. The clock within never stops ticking through your days and nights. A tiny cluster of cells in the hypothalamus acts as your internal clock. The master timekeeper of the body is a structure barely larger than a grain of rice, a cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons located in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and these cells generate rhythmic electrical and chemical signals that set the pace for circadian timing throughout the entire body, communicating with other brain regions and peripheral tissues to keep every process synchronized with the 24-hour cycle of light and darkness that governs life on Earth. And even in complete darkness, these neurons continue to oscillate with a period close to a day, an internal metronome that evolved over millions of years to anticipate the regular rotation of the planet. And damage to this tiny structure can leave an organism adrift in time, sleeping and waking at random intervals. A handful of cells holds the schedule of your life. This clock responds to light entering through your eyes. Although the circadian clock can run on its own in the absence of external cues, it relies on light to stay synchronized with the actual day-night cycle of the world around you, and special cells in the retina that are distinct from the rods and cones used for vision detect the presence of light, and sends signals directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, informing the brain whether it is day or night. And this information allows the clock to reset itself each day, adjusting to seasonal changes in day length and correcting any drift that might otherwise accumulate over time. And exposure to bright light in the morning helps anchor the rhythm to an appropriate schedule, while light exposure late at night can delay it, which is one reason why screens before bed can make falling asleep more difficult. Light tells the brain when the day belongs. Melatonin, the sleep hormone, rises as darkness falls. As evening approaches and the light entering your eyes begins to dim, the pineal gland receives a signal from the circadian master clock and begins to secrete melatonin, a hormone that does not force you to sleep, but rather opens an internal gate, lowering the threshold for the onset of rest and signaling to systems throughout the body that the time for sleep is approaching along this quiet rhythm. And this rise in melatonin continues steadily through the night, peaking in the hours before dawn and then falling sharply as morning light suppresses its release, a daily wave that tracks the darkness like a faithful shadow. And artificial light at night, especially the blue wavelengths emitted by screens, can blunt or significantly delay this natural rise, leaving you alert and restless when your body should be preparing quietly for rest. Darkness calls forth the ancient messenger of sleep. And now, as you lie here in the quiet, perhaps you can feel a gentle wave of rest moving through you. Let your jaw loosen, let your hands grow heavy. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Cortisol, the stress hormone, drops to its lowest levels during early sleep. Throughout the day, cortisol circulates in your bloodstream, rising in response to stress and helping the body mobilize energy for the challenges ahead. But as night falls and sleep approaches, this hormone reaches its lowest concentration of the entire 24-hour day. And this reduction is important, for elevated cortisol would interfere with the deep restorative stages of sleep, and with the growth hormone release that peaks during these hours, and the dip in cortisol allows the body to turn inward. Focusing not on external threats, but on internal repair, a hormonal permission slip for the night's restorative work to proceed unhindered. And when anxiety or chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated, it can fragment sleep and reduce the time spent in truly restorative stages, leaving the mind unable to find the peace it seeks. Stress must step aside for rest to arrive. Cortisol begins to rise again before dawn, preparing you to wake. In the hours just before your eyes open each morning, even before the first rays of light have reached your face, cortisol begins a gradual ascent that will continue for the first hour or so after waking. A carefully timed surge known as the cortisol awakening response that prepares both body and mind for the demands of the day ahead, mobilizing energy stores from throughout the body, sharpening mental alertness and focus, and priming the immune system for any challenges that may arise. And this anticipatory rise is orchestrated with remarkable precision by the circadian clock, timed to coincide with the expected moment of waking. And it is one of the key reasons why waking naturally feels so different from being jarred suddenly awake by an alarm in the middle of a sleep cycle. The body begins its quiet preparation long before consciousness has even returned. Body temperature falls during sleep, reaching its lowest point in the early hours. As you settle into sleep, your core body temperature begins a slow decline that will continue for several hours, dropping by roughly 1 degree Celsius by the time it reaches its nadir in the early hours of the morning. And this cooling is not a passive process, but an active regulation, the brain directing blood flow away from the core and toward the extremities where heat can dissipate more readily into the surrounding air. And this drop in temperature facilitates the transition into deeper stages of sleep, creating the ideal thermal environment for the brain's restorative work, which is why a cool bedroom often promotes better rest, while overheating can lead to restless nights and premature waking, fragmenting the sleep architecture. The body cools itself deliberately, crafting the conditions for deeper sleep. A cool environment helps the brain transition into deeper sleep. When the ambient temperature around you is slightly cool, rather than warm, the body can more easily shed the heat it needs to lose in order to drop core temperature and enter deep sleep. And researchers have consistently found that sleeping in a room that is a few degrees cooler than daytime comfort levels supports longer and more stable sleep, with fewer awakenings and more time spent in the truly restorative stages. And this is why heavy blankets paired with cool air often feel so deeply satisfying and conducive to rest, allowing the sleeper to maintain surface warmth while the core cools beneath, and conversely why hot summer nights can leave you tossing and turning restlessly, the body simply unable to achieve the thermal conditions it requires for deep and truly restorative rest throughout the night. Coolness invites the deepest slumber. Blood pressure decreases during restful sleep, giving the heart time to recover. Throughout the night, particularly during the deeper stages of non-REM sleep, blood pressure falls to levels significantly lower than those measured during waking hours, a phenomenon known as nocturnal dipping that gives the cardiovascular system a period of reduced workload and allows the heart and blood vessels time to recover from the demands of the day. And people whose blood pressure fails to dip adequately during sleep are at increased risk for heart disease, stroke, and other cardiovascular complications, suggesting that this nightly reduction is not merely incidental but essential for long-term cardiovascular health and longevity. And the quality of sleep thus becomes a matter not just of energy and mood, but of the quiet maintenance that keeps the heart beating strong through all the years ahead. Rest protects the rhythm of the pulse. From the rhythms of the body, we turn now to the hidden conversations happening between billions of neurons, a silent symphony that rewires who you are. Neuroplasticity continues during sleep, reshaping the brain's connections. The brain is not a fixed structure, but a constantly evolving network of connections that strengthen, weaken, and reorganize in response to experience, a property known as neuroplasticity. And this reshaping does not pause when you fall asleep, but rather accelerates, the sleeping brain taking advantage of its freedom from external demands to refine the patterns laid down during waking hours, strengthening useful connections through repeated activation and pruning away those that serve no purpose. And this overnight remodeling is essential for learning and adaptation, the final step in a process that begins with experience and culminates in lasting change. And without sleep, the plastic processes that allow the brain to grow and change operate at a fraction of their potential. The architecture of the mind is rebuilt each night. New neural pathways are strengthened while you dream. During sleep, and especially during the vivid theater of REM, the brain replays the patterns of activity associated with recent experiences. And with each replay, the synaptic connections involved grow slightly stronger, more reliable, more likely to fire together in the future whenever called upon. And this gradual strengthening is part of what transforms a fleeting experience into a stable long-term memory or a practiced skill into an automatic reflex. And the process is not passive but active, the brain selecting which pathways to reinforce based on criteria that include emotional significance and relevance. And by morning, the neural landscape has shifted, pathways that were tentative now standing firmer and more defined, ready to support the actions and thoughts of another waking day with greater ease. Practice makes permanent only when restorative sleep faithfully follows. Skills practiced during the day are refined and polished in the sleeping brain. When you spend the day learning a new motor skill, whether it is a musical passage or a tennis serve or the movements of a surgical procedure, The brain does not complete its consolidation work until you sleep, for it is during the hours of rest that the neural circuits underlying the skill are carefully consolidated and optimized, the movements becoming smoother and more efficient without any additional conscious practice. And studies have shown that people tested on a newly learned task often perform better after a night of sleep than they did immediately after training, a gain that cannot be attributed to simple rest, but must involve active reprocessing of the motor memory during the unconscious hours when the brain is completely free to quietly rehearse and refine what was learned. The sleeping brain quietly rehearses what you learned. Musicians who sleep after practice often play better the next day. Among the most striking demonstrations of sleep's role in skill consolidation come from scientific studies of musicians who frequently report that a difficult passage seems noticeably easier after a night away from the instrument, and controlled experiments have confirmed this intuition, showing that performers who sleep between practice sessions improve more than those who remain awake for the same duration. The brain apparently spending its unconscious hours refining the neural programs that control finger placement, timing, and dynamics. And this means that the diligent student who practices late into the night and sleeps little may actually learn less than the one who puts down the instrument earlier and allows sleep to do its essential, irreplaceable, and deeply restorative consolidation work. Rest is part of the performance. Learning a language is more effective when followed by a good night's rest. The acquisition of a new language involves encoding vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and the subtle rules that govern when each applies, a complex web of knowledge that must be integrated carefully with what the learner already knows. And sleep plays a crucial role at every stage of this important process, consolidating newly encountered words, strengthening the associations between sounds and meanings, and allowing the patterns of the language to settle into the neural networks that will eventually produce fluent and natural speech. And research has repeatedly shown that language learners who sleep after study sessions retain more and make faster progress than those who do not. The sleeping brain quietly practicing and rehearsing the phrases the waking mind struggled to master. Words take root more deeply in rested and well-nourished soil. The brain integrates new information with existing knowledge during sleep. Learning is not merely the accumulation of isolated facts, but the weaving of new information into the fabric of what you already know. And this integration is one of the primary tasks the sleeping brain undertakes, comparing recently acquired knowledge with existing schemas and memories, finding connections that were not apparent during waking hours, and reorganizing memory networks so that related concepts are stored in closer proximity, making retrieval faster and associations richer and more readily accessible. And this is why sleeping after studying a complex subject often produces a clearer understanding than was present immediately after the study session, the brain having quietly and patiently restructured the material into a more coherent whole during the unconscious hours of the night. New threads are woven into an existing tapestry. And in this integration, something strange sometimes emerges, insights that arrive not through effort, but through surrender to the night. Sleep has been linked to sudden moments of insight and clarity. The experience of struggling with a problem during the day and then waking the next morning with the solution suddenly clear is so common that it has become a cliché. Yet it reflects a genuine cognitive phenomenon supported by considerable scientific research. For the sleeping brain continues to work on unsolved problems even after conscious effort has ceased, exploring possibilities and testing connections in ways that bypass the limitations of deliberate thought. And when the solution finally emerges, it often feels as though it arrived from nowhere, a gift from the unconscious that required only the willingness to step away and rest peacefully, and this phenomenon highlights the importance of incubation, the strategic use of sleep to allow the mind time to work behind closed doors. Answers sometimes come not through more effort, but through less. The phrase "sleep on it" reflects a genuine cognitive phenomenon. The folk wisdom embedded in the common advice to sleep on a difficult decision turns out to be firmly grounded in neuroscience. For studies have consistently shown that people who allow time for sleep before making complex choices often arrive at decisions that better reflect their underlying preferences and more accurately weigh the relevant factors than those who decide immediately under pressure. The sleeping brain, apparently sorting through the competing considerations with great patience and arriving at conclusions that hurried conscious deliberation missed entirely. And this beneficial effect is especially pronounced when the decision involves many variables or ambiguous trade-offs, situations in which the limited capacity of focused waking attention is easily overwhelmed. The wisdom of deliberate delay includes the essential wisdom of sleep. Complex problems may be solved by the unconscious mind during rest, while the conscious mind can consider only one thought at a time and struggles mightily with problems that involve many interacting elements and competing constraints. The unconscious processes that operate during sleep are not bound by these frustrating limitations, free to explore vast combinatorial spaces and evaluate possibilities that would take the deliberate waking mind hours or even days to work through systematically. And this remarkable parallel processing power is one reason why intractable problems sometimes yield to the simple strategy of setting them aside and allowing sleep to intervene, the unconscious continuing its tireless search even as the conscious mind rests. And though not every problem will be solved overnight, the probability of achieving a breakthrough increases substantially when sleep is given its proper due. The unconscious sees clearly what waking eyes cannot. The structure of benzene was famously discovered in a dream. In the 19th century, the German chemist August Kekulé had been struggling persistently to understand the structure of benzene, a molecule whose unusual properties did not fit any linear arrangement of atoms he could envision. And legend holds that the answer came to him in a dream, an image of a snake seizing its own tail that suggested the ring structure that would revolutionize organic chemistry and transform our understanding of molecular bonds forever. And while the details of this story have certainly been embellished over time, it captures a truth that many scientists and artists recognize from their own personal experience: the way solutions can emerge from the relaxed, associative state of dreaming when the rigid constraints of waking logic have been loosened and the mind is free to wander. Dreams have redrawn the very map of human knowledge. REM sleep appears to be especially important for creative thinking. Among the different stages of sleep, REM seems to play a particularly significant role in supporting creativity. The loosened inhibitions and free-flowing associations of the dreaming mind providing fertile ground for novel combinations of ideas. And experiments have shown that people awakened from REM sleep are more likely to solve problems requiring creative insight than those awakened from other stages, suggesting that the strange logic of dreams is not merely entertaining, but functionally valuable all through the night. A nightly incubation period in which the rules that govern waking thought are temporarily suspended and the imagination runs free. And this connection between REM and creativity helps explain why some of history's most original and innovative thinkers have spoken so eloquently of the importance of dreams. The mind wanders so that it may discover. The sleeping brain makes connections the waking mind often misses. The rigid categorization and focused attention that serve so well during waking hours can also become blinders, preventing the mind from seeing relationships that lie outside the current frame of reference. And during sleep, especially during REM, these blinders are removed, the brain free to wander across domains and make associations that would seem irrelevant or distracting to the waking self. And this unconstrained exploration is what allows the sleeping brain to stumble upon connections the waking brain would never have sought, linking distant ideas and revealing patterns that were hidden in plain sight. And this is why keeping a notepad by the bed has become the habit of so many creative minds throughout history, ready to catch the morning's precious gift before it slips quietly away and is forgotten. Wandering leads where focus cannot follow. Yet not all journeys through the night are peaceful. Sometimes the sleeping mind stumbles into darker corridors. Nightmares are the brain's way of processing fear and anxiety. When the dreaming mind produces scenes of terror and threat, chasing you through dark corridors or confronting you with impossible dangers, it may not be malfunction but function, a way of processing the fears and anxieties that accumulated during waking hours, exposing you to simulated danger in a context where no actual harm can occur, and thereby helping to extinguish or modulate the emotional charge of those fears. And this nightmare as therapy view is supported by research showing that people often dream more intensely about recent stressors, and that the emotional intensity of memories fades more quickly when they have been dreamed about. Though when nightmares become too frequent or intense, they can disrupt rest and become a problem in themselves, requiring intervention rather than simple acceptance. Fear played out in dreams may lose some of its power over waking life. Night terrors occur during deep sleep and are different from nightmares. Unlike nightmares, which unfold during the dream-rich REM stage and are often remembered upon waking, night terrors erupt from the deepest phases of non-REM sleep, episodes during which the sleeper may scream, thrash, or sit bolt upright with eyes wide open, yet remain entirely unaware of what is happening, caught in a state that is neither fully asleep nor fully awake. And these episodes are far more common in children than adults, typically fading naturally as the brain matures and sleep architecture stabilizes, and those who experience them rarely recall any dream content at all, the terror apparently arising not from a narrative, but from some deeper neurological event that science does not yet fully understand, a primal alarm sounding from circuits that lie beneath the reach of conscious memory, leaving no trace when morning arrives. Terror without story is still terror, felt though not remembered. People who experience night terrors rarely remember them. One of the most unsettling features of night terrors for those who witness them is that the sufferer often has no memory of the episode the next morning, no recollection of the screaming or the wild movements that so alarmed anyone nearby. For the event took place during deep non-REM sleep, when the brain regions responsible for encoding conscious memories are largely offline and unable to record what is happening. And this amnesia distinguishes night terrors from nightmares, which are usually recalled in vivid and sometimes disturbing detail after waking. And it means that the person affected may feel perfectly fine upon waking, bewildered by the concern of others who spent the night watching with worry as these unsettling events unfolded that will simply never be remembered. The terror leaves no trace in conscious memory, yet disturbs everyone else. Sleep paralysis happens when the mind wakes before the body does. Occasionally, the transition between sleep and wakefulness goes slightly awry, the conscious mind flickering online, while the paralysis that normally accompanies REM sleep has not yet been lifted. And the result is a terrifying experience in which you are fully aware of your surroundings, yet completely unable to move, trapped in a body that refuses to obey your commands. And the episode usually lasts only seconds or minutes before full mobility returns, harmless in the physical sense, but deeply distressing, leaving the person shaken and confused and many who experience it also report hallucinatory presences in the room, shadowy figures or pressing weights that seem to explain the paralysis in terrifying terms. And this unsettling phenomenon reminds us how delicately balanced are the mechanisms that govern our passage between sleeping and waking. The body sometimes forgets to release the sleeper. Sleep paralysis has inspired countless myths of demons and spirits. Across cultures and centuries, people have described nocturnal visitations by malevolent beings that pin them to the bed and steal their breath. Creatures variously called incubi, succubi, hags, or shadow men, and modern research suggests that many of these legends are rooted in the phenomenon of sleep paralysis combined with hypnopompic hallucinations, the brain generating threatening figures to explain a paralysis it cannot otherwise account for. And the remarkable consistency of these reports across unrelated cultures and throughout recorded history speaks to the universality of the underlying experience. The same neurological quirk producing remarkably similar unsettling imagery wherever sleeping humans are found, night after night, throughout the countless ages of human history. Science has given a name to the ancient demons of the night. Lucid dreaming is when you become aware that you are dreaming. Most dreams unfold without any awareness that what you are experiencing is anything other than reality, but occasionally, the critical faculties reawaken within the dream itself, and you realize that the world around you is a construction of your own mind, that you are lying in bed while your consciousness explores an environment that exists nowhere but in your neurons and imagination. And this state, known as lucid dreaming, can range from a fleeting recognition that fades back into ordinary dreaming to a sustained and deliberate awareness that allows you to explore and direct the dream narrative, turning fear into curiosity and powerlessness into creative mastery, a window of consciousness within the unconscious that has fascinated philosophers, psychologists, and dreamers throughout recorded history. To know you are dreaming is a strange and remarkable gift of human consciousness. Some people can learn to control their dreams with practice. For those who achieve lucidity within their dreams, a remarkable possibility opens, the ability not merely to observe but to direct, to choose where the dream goes and what it contains, flying at will through imagined landscapes, summoning environments from memory, or confronting fears in a setting where failure carries no real consequence at all. And techniques have been developed over the decades to increase the likelihood of lucid dreams. From simple reality checks performed during the day to sophisticated methods that manipulate the timing of REM sleep. And while not everyone can achieve dream control reliably or consistently, those who do often describe it as an extraordinary and transformative experience, a taste of creative omnipotence that exists nowhere else in ordinary waking experience. The dreamer becomes the author of the dream. Sleepwalking occurs when part of the brain wakes while the body remains asleep. In the strange dissociation of sleepwalking, the motor systems of the brain rouse from deep sleep while the regions responsible for consciousness and judgment remain dormant. And the result is a person who rises from bed, walks through the house, performs complex actions, yet has no awareness of what they are doing and little or no memory of it afterward. And these episodes are most common in children, but can occur at any age, triggered by stress, sleep deprivation, or certain medications. And the behaviors displayed can range from simple wandering to elaborate sequences that seem purposeful yet are governed by no conscious intent, an automation of the body in the absence of the mind, a reminder of how many of our daily movements require no conscious supervision at all, the body knowing how to navigate even when no one is home inside the skull. Part of the brain walks alone. And now, as these strange territories of sleep settle behind you, let your breath become soft and slow. Feel the weight of your body pressing gently against the bed, There is nothing to fear in these hours of rest. Sleep talking is more common in children and usually harmless. In the middle of the night, a voice may rise from the sleeping body, muttering words that make no sense or speaking in clear sentences that seem addressed to someone present only in a dream. And this phenomenon, known as somnoloquy or sleep talking, is particularly common in childhood, when the brain is still maturing and the boundaries between sleep stages are less firmly established, and the content of sleep speech is often unrelated to any dream the speaker might later recall. Fragments of vocabulary surfacing without context or meaning, and while occasionally alarming to anyone who hears it, sleep talking is almost always harmless, a quirk of the sleeping brain rather than a sign of any underlying problem, merely words escaping through cracks in the wall between sleeping and waking consciousness. Words escape when consciousness is absent. Most sleep disorders can be improved with changes in routine and environment. While the mysteries of sleep can sometimes go wrong in ways that seem to defy easy remedy, the truth is that many of the most common sleep difficulties respond well to changes that cost nothing and require no medication. Adjustments to bedtime routines, attention to the temperature and darkness of the sleep environment, the timing of meals and exercise, and the reduction of screen exposure in the hours before rest. And even severe insomnia often improves when these behavioral factors are addressed consistently over time, the brain gradually relearning patterns that had been disrupted by modern habits. And this is why sleep specialists often begin treatment with behavioral interventions rather than pharmaceuticals, trusting that the brain knows how to sleep if only it is given the right conditions. Simple changes can unlock deeper rest. From the mysteries of disrupted sleep, we turn to something even more fundamental: the way the brain safeguards the body through each passing hour. Sleep deprivation impairs judgment as severely as alcohol intoxication. The cognitive deficits that accumulate after just one night without sleep are so profound that studies have compared them to the impairment caused by alcohol intoxication, with reaction times slowing, attention fragmenting, and the ability to make sound judgments deteriorating in ways that the sleep-deprived person often fails to recognize, convinced they are functioning normally when objective measures show they are not. And this disconnect between perceived and actual performance is one of the most concerning aspects of sleep deprivation, leading people to drive cars, operate machinery, work on important projects, or make significant life decisions while impaired in ways they would never tolerate if the cause were drink rather than tiredness, the invisible nature of the impairment making it all the more dangerous. The tired mind is a compromised mind, though it rarely knows the extent of its own impairment. After just one night of poor sleep, emotional regulation becomes considerably harder to maintain. The brain regions responsible for keeping emotions in check, particularly the prefrontal cortex, rely heavily on adequate sleep to function properly. And after even a single night of insufficient rest, the connection between this regulatory region and the emotion-generating amygdala weakens noticeably, leaving the amygdala to react more strongly to negative stimuli without the usual modulating influence. And the result is a heightened emotional reactivity that can turn minor irritations into major frustrations and leave the sleep-deprived person feeling overwhelmed by everyday challenges that would normally seem quite manageable, the emotional landscape becoming rougher and more treacherous with each passing sleepless hour, every small setback feeling larger than it truly is. The buffer thins with every lost hour of rest. The amygdala becomes significantly more reactive when sleep-deprived. Nestled deep within the temporal lobes, the amygdala is a structure central to the processing of emotional stimuli, especially those associated with threat and fear. and imaging studies have shown that after a night of poor sleep, the amygdala responds more intensely to negative images than it does in well-rested individuals, as though the gain had been turned up dramatically on the brain's internal alarm system. And this heightened reactivity helps explain why the world can seem darker and more threatening when you are exhausted, why small setbacks feel like catastrophes and minor slights cut deeper than they should. The usual careful calibration between stimulus and emotional response thrown off by the absence of the restorative sleep that would normally maintain it and keep you balanced throughout the day. The alarm grows louder when the restorer of calm is denied. Chronic sleep loss is linked to anxiety and depression. While occasional poor sleep leaves you tired and irritable, the effects of chronic sleep deprivation extend far deeper, reaching into the very foundations of mental health. For prolonged periods of insufficient rest are consistently associated with significantly elevated risks of anxiety disorders and clinical depression. The cumulative wear on emotional regulation and stress response systems, eventually manifesting as clinical conditions that may require professional treatment and intervention beyond simple rest. And though the relationship runs in both directions, with mental illness often disrupting sleep, while lack of sleep worsens mental illness. The evidence is increasingly clear that protecting sleep is a form of protecting the mind itself from invisible harm that builds over time and compounds with each passing restless night. Neglecting rest can quietly erode the ground beneath you over time. The brain's ability to form new memories declines sharply without rest. The neural mechanisms that encode new information and stabilize it into lasting memory depend critically on sleep, and when that sleep is denied, the hippocampus cannot perform its function efficiently, struggling to capture new experiences and failing to transfer them properly to long-term storage. And experiments have shown that people who learn a task and then remain awake retain far less than those who sleep, the memories decaying before consolidation could occur. And this effect compounds dangerously over time, each sleepless night adding to a growing deficit that later rest cannot fully repair, the brain becoming increasingly unable to hold what it learns, important details slipping away like water through fingers. What is not rested is often lost forever, leaving only vague impressions where clear memories should have formed. Sleep strengthens the vital connection between the brain and immune system. The immune system and the brain are in constant communication, exchanging signals that coordinate the body's response to infection and injury, and sleep plays a crucial role in maintaining this essential dialogue, allowing the production of immune cells and signaling molecules that keep the defenses primed and ready. And chronic sleep deprivation weakens this communication, leaving the body more vulnerable to pathogens and slower to recover from illness. And even the effectiveness of vaccinations can be reduced in those who are sleep deprived, the immune system simply unable to mount the robust response that would follow a full night of rest. And this is why people who skimp on sleep often find themselves catching every cold that passes through, their defenses lowered by the very neglect they thought they could afford. Rest arms the body's defenders. And while the brain repairs and restores, the hours of rest become a bridge, carrying you from the fatigue of today into the possibility of tomorrow. The brain cycles through sleep stages multiple times each night. Sleep is not a single uniform state, but a repeating sequence of stages that the brain traverses again and again throughout the night, descending from wakefulness through light sleep into the profound depths of slow-wave rest before rising again toward the vivid theater of REM. And this cycle repeats roughly every 90 minutes, 4 or 5 times during a typical night, though the proportion of each stage shifts as the hours pass. with more deep sleep occurring early and more REM appearing toward the morning hours. And each passage through the cycle contributes something unique and essential to the restoration of body and mind, a carefully orchestrated journey that unfolds without conscious guidance or awareness, the brain knowing exactly when to descend and when to rise toward the surface. The night is not flat, but deeply and beautifully rhythmic. Each sleep cycle lasts approximately 90 minutes. The average duration of a single journey through all the stages of sleep, from light through deep and back up to REM, is close to 90 minutes, a period that has become the basis for many recommendations about sleep timing. The idea being that waking at the end of a cycle, rather than in the middle, produces less grogginess and a smoother transition to alertness. And while individual variation means this number is only an approximation, the underlying rhythm is remarkably consistent across people and across nights, a regularity that allowed scientists in the 20th century to discover the architecture of sleep by recording the electrical patterns of volunteers through long laboratory nights. And some sleep calculators and smart alarms now use this knowledge to wake people at optimal moments, timing the arousal to coincide with the natural lightening that occurs between cycles. 90 minutes marks one full turn of the wheel. The proportion of REM sleep increases as the night progresses. In the early hours of the night, the brain prioritizes deep slow-wave sleep, devoting more time to the restorative processes that require those low-frequency rhythms. But as the night advances and this need is met, the balance shifts, each subsequent cycle containing less deep sleep and more REM, until the final hours before waking are dominated by long stretches of dream-rich activity. And this progression means that cutting sleep short by waking early deprives you disproportionately of REM, the stage most linked to emotional processing and creative cognition. And those who must wake before dawn often report feeling emotionally fragile even after what seemed like adequate sleep, the loss of those late REM periods leaving the emotional system insufficiently restored, a reminder that not all hours of sleep contribute equally to every function and purpose. The morning hours are dream time. Deep sleep is most abundant in the early hours of the night. If you want the benefits of deep sleep, the growth hormone release and the tissue repair and the efficient glymphatic cleansing of metabolic waste, the best strategy is to fall asleep early enough that the brain can access these stages when they are most available in the first half of the night. And those who habitually stay up late may find that even a full duration of sleep leaves them feeling less restored than it should. The early hours missed, and the deep sleep window narrowed by a delayed bedtime. And this is one reason why shift workers who sleep during the day often report poorer physical recovery than those who sleep at night, their biology still expecting the deepest rest to arrive soon after darkness, but finding only bright daylight waiting at the window instead, disrupting the natural rhythm. The first hours of sleep carry the deepest rest. The brain times these cycles with extraordinary precision. The orchestration of sleep stages is not haphazard, but governed by neural and hormonal signals that keep the transitions remarkably consistent from night to night. The brain knowing when to descend into the depths and when to rise toward the lighter stages, when to produce spindles, and when to initiate REM paralysis, all timed with a precision that allows the specific functions of each stage to be accomplished before the next begins, the entire sequence unfolding with clockwork regularity. And this internal timing mechanism operates largely without conscious input, trusting patterns established over a lifetime and calibrated by the circadian signals that tie sleep to the external day, adjusting subtly to the changing demands of life and the shifting boundaries of rest. The silent conductor never truly sleeps, but guides the orchestra faithfully through every night. Waking at the end of a cycle tends to feel more natural and refreshed. Anyone who has been jolted awake by an alarm in the depths of slow-wave sleep, knows the disorientation and heaviness that can follow, a state of confusion that takes time to clear and leaves you feeling groggy and disconnected from the world. And this sleep inertia is far less severe when waking occurs at the end of a completed cycle, during the lighter stages that naturally precede the next descent into deeper rest. And this is why timed alarms and sleep-tracking devices often attempt to rouse you at optimal moments, intercepting the rising phase of a cycle rather than interrupting the trough, allowing the transition into wakefulness to feel natural rather than forced, the brain having already begun its preparations for the day rather than being wrenched from activities that were not yet complete. Timing the waking may be as important as timing the sleep itself. Yet sleep is not only about what the brain does, it is also about what the brain chooses not to do, the careful silencing of certain systems to let others flourish. The brain reduces sensory processing during sleep to allow for restoration. During wakefulness, the brain is constantly bombarded with information from the senses, a flood of sights and sounds and touches that must be analyzed and responded to in real time. But during sleep, this external input is dramatically attenuated, the thalamus acting as a gatekeeper that blocks most signals before they can reach the cortex and disturb the sleeping mind from its essential work. And this sensory isolation is what allows the brain to turn its resources inward, focusing on the internal tasks of consolidation and repair rather than the external demands of the environment. And it is this same gating that makes the sleep environment so important, for stimuli that breach the threshold can fragment rest, pulling you back toward the surface and interrupting the restorative processes that require unbroken continuity and peace. The world is muted so that the brain may listen within. Only important or sudden stimuli can break through the sleeping brain's filter. The gating mechanism that blocks most sensory input during sleep is not absolute but adjustable, carefully calibrated to allow through signals that might indicate danger or require immediate attention. And so while the gentle hum of a refrigerator or the distant murmur of traffic may be seamlessly ignored, a sudden crash or a call of your name can still rouse you from deep slumber, the brain maintaining a low-level vigilance even as it rests peacefully. Evaluating each sound against established criteria of relevance and urgency, and deciding in milliseconds whether to awaken or to let you continue sleeping peacefully, a remarkable feat of parallel processing that happens entirely outside of conscious awareness, protecting you while you rest throughout the night and into the early morning hours. The guard remains faithfully at the gate, even in the deepest darkness. A mother can sleep through traffic noise, but wake instantly to her baby's cry. One of the most striking demonstrations of the selectivity of sleeping attention is the phenomenon observed in new parents, who may slumber peacefully through sirens and thunderstorms, yet snap awake the instant their child whimpers in the next room. A selectivity that arises not from louder volume, but from higher relevance, the brain prioritizing signals that evolution and experience have marked as critically important far above those that are merely loud. And this ability to sleep through irrelevant noise while remaining exquisitely sensitive to meaningful sounds is compelling evidence that the sleeping brain is far from simply turned off, still monitoring the auditory landscape, still filtering the relevant from the trivial, still protecting what matters most with unwavering dedication, even in the depths of slumber. Meaning always trumps mere decibels in the hierarchy of sleeping attention. The brain remains vigilant even in the deepest stages of rest. Even in the slow-wave depths of non-REM sleep, when waking someone feels nearly impossible and the brain waves roll with majestic slowness across the cortex, a quiet thread of vigilance persists, monitoring the environment for signals that might require arousal, and this sentinel function is essential for survival, a guarantee that the vulnerability of sleep will not become total helplessness, and those signals that do penetrate the barrier of unconsciousness. Sudden loud sounds, or the sharp odor of smoke, or the cry of a child, can yank the sleeper from even the deepest stage with startling speed, the brain capable of a rapid transition to full alertness when the situation demands, ready to respond to danger even from the furthest reaches of slumber. Rest never means complete abandonment of awareness, only a dimming of the watchful flame. External sounds are sometimes woven into dreams rather than waking you. Rather than rouse you from sleep, sounds from the environment may occasionally be incorporated into an ongoing dream, the alarm clock becoming a ringing telephone in the narrative, or the rumble of a passing lorry transforming into thunder in a dream landscape. And this phenomenon suggests that the sleeping brain is processing sensory input at some level even as it filters most of it out, interpreting what it receives in terms consistent with the dream rather than allowing it to disrupt the continuity of rest. And while these incorporations are not always seamless, they reveal the extraordinary creativity with which the dreaming mind handles intrusions, bending the fabric of the dream to accommodate what cannot be ignored, weaving external reality into the internal story with a fluency that conscious imagination rarely achieves. The dream bends reality to preserve its own continuity. The sleeping brain can still recognize familiar voices. Research has shown that the sleeping brain responds differently to familiar voices than to unfamiliar ones, even when the sleeper does not awaken, the auditory cortex showing patterns of activity that indicate recognition at some level below conscious awareness. And this preferential processing of known voices makes profound evolutionary sense, for a call from a family member or close companion is more likely to require attention than a random voice in the distance. And it helps explain why hearing your own name spoken in a crowded room can pull your attention even from deep distraction, a recognition that apparently persists into sleep, the brain maintaining a vigilant channel for those whose words might matter most even as it filters out the surrounding noise of the wider world throughout the night. Familiar voices carry weight even in the deepest dark. And as the brain listens selectively, it continues its deeper work, the silent reorganization of everything you have learned and felt. Emotional memories are processed differently during different stages of sleep. The brain does not treat all memories equally during sleep, but handles emotional and neutral content through distinct pathways and mechanisms, with different stages of the sleep cycle contributing differently to the consolidation of each type. And research suggests that REM sleep plays a particularly important role in processing memories that carry significant emotional weight. The unique neurochemical environment of that stage, allowing the emotional charge to be carefully separated from the factual content, so that you can remember what happened without feeling the full overpowering force of the original emotion each time you recall it, a form of overnight healing that may help explain why even the most painful memories gradually soften with the passage of time and distance and the gentle work of sleep. Different feelings find their proper place in different chambers of the night. REM sleep helps soften the emotional charge of difficult memories. The folk wisdom that things will look better in the morning reflects a genuine neurobiological reality, for the sleeping brain, particularly during REM, engages in a form of emotional triage that carefully recalibrates the intensity of feelings attached to recent experiences. And what seemed overwhelming at bedtime may feel more manageable by breakfast, not because the problem has changed, but because the brain has adjusted the emotional response, softening the sharp and jagged edges of distress and bringing clarity where there was only confusion. And this overnight recalibration is one reason why sleep deprivation leaves people feeling so emotionally fragile and overwhelmed. The processing that would normally occur during the night simply not happening when rest is denied. Dawn brings perspective that the night has quietly and patiently crafted. Dreams may act as a form of overnight therapy for the mind. The idea that dreaming serves a genuinely therapeutic function for mental health has gained considerable support from research showing that REM sleep, the stage most associated with vivid and emotionally rich dreams, plays a crucial role in processing emotional material and resolving psychological tension accumulated during waking hours. And some scientists have gone so far as to describe REM sleep as overnight therapy. A nightly session conducted entirely within the brain, in which it works through the day's emotional residue without the constraints of waking logic or conscious censorship, allowing feelings to be felt and released in the safety of sleep. And while dreams are not always pleasant and may sometimes disturb rather than soothe, even the unsettling ones may ultimately serve this important therapeutic function. The therapist within works unpaid, unseen, and entirely for your benefit. Sleep helps regulate mood by resetting emotional baselines. The emotional reactivity that builds up during waking hours, the accumulated frustrations and anxieties and sensitivities, is in part reset by sleep, the brain recalibrating its emotional setpoints so that you begin the next day from a more neutral baseline rather than carrying forward the heightened state of the previous evening. And this resetting is one reason why sleep deprivation leads to increasingly fragile moods, each day adding to a deficit that cannot be cleared. Until even small provocations trigger outsized reactions, and conversely why a single good night of rest can feel like an emotional fresh start, the world seeming kinder and more manageable than before, the minor irritations that seemed unbearable the night before now appearing in their proper insignificant proportion. Sleep returns the dial to zero, preparing you to face the new day with patience and resilience restored. And now, as these truths about emotion and memory settle within you, there is nothing left to carry. Let your thoughts become soft and shapeless, like clouds dissolving at the edge of the sky. You are safe here. The brain consolidates social learning during sleep. Much of what makes humans successful social creatures is learned rather than innate. And this complex social learning, the subtle cues that indicate trustworthiness or deception, the patterns that help predict behavior, the unwritten norms that govern everyday interaction, is consolidated during sleep, just as factual knowledge and motor skills are. With the hippocampus and its associated neural networks replaying and carefully strengthening the memories of social encounters and interactions during the quiet hours of the night, and people who sleep well after complex social interactions often show improved recall and greater ability to navigate similar situations in the future, the brain having quietly rehearsed the dynamics of connection and conflict during the hours of deep rest and renewal. Society and its complexities are remembered in the quiet hours of the night. Relationships and social cues are processed overnight. The faces of people you met during the day, the tone of voice used in a difficult conversation, the body language that signaled something unspoken, all of this social information is processed and consolidated while you sleep, integrated with existing knowledge about relationships and social dynamics. And this overnight processing may influence how you feel about those people and situations the next morning, sometimes producing insights or shifts in perspective that were not apparent the night before. A clarity that arrives not through conscious analysis, but through the quiet work of the sleeping brain, sifting and sorting the interpersonal data gathered throughout each waking day, helping you navigate the complex web of human connections with slightly greater wisdom and understanding each time you wake from rest. The brain rehearses society while the body rests. Sleep supports empathy by restoring emotional sensitivity. The capacity to read others' emotions and respond with appropriate feeling, the core of empathy, depends heavily on the prefrontal circuits and amygdala connections that are restored and recalibrated during sleep. And research has shown that sleep-deprived individuals perform worse on tasks requiring emotional recognition and show reduced activity in empathy-related brain regions, less able to perceive what others are feeling and less inclined to respond with care. And this suggests that adequate sleep is not merely a personal comfort, but a social necessity. The connections that bind us to one another requiring the nightly maintenance that only rest can provide, the ability to feel with another person diminished when the brain that should feel has not been refreshed, and the warmth that should flow between people reduced to a trickle when exhaustion takes hold. Compassion requires rest, and empathy is renewed each night. And as the night deepens, the brain begins preparations for a gentle awakening, a gradual return to the waking world. The brain begins to prepare for waking long before you open your eyes. In the final hour before your usual waking time, even without an alarm, the brain initiates a gradual transition toward alertness, body temperature beginning to rise, cortisol beginning its morning surge, sleep growing lighter and more prone to the kinds of brief awakenings that often go unremembered. And this anticipatory preparation is orchestrated by the circadian clock, which has learned your typical schedule and times its signals accordingly. So that when your eyes finally open, the transition feels smooth rather than jarring, the body already primed for the demands of the day ahead. And this is why waking at your usual time often happens naturally, even when you forget to set your alarm. The internal clock so precisely calibrated that it needs no external prompt to begin the ascent toward consciousness, preparing you for the new day with remarkable precision and care. Waking begins before it is noticed. Body temperature starts to rise about an hour before natural waking. After spending the night at its lowest point, core body temperature begins a gradual ascent approximately an hour before you would naturally awake, a warming that signals to all the body's systems that the period of rest is drawing to a close and the time for activity is approaching. And this rise in temperature is part of what shifts sleep into its lightest phases, making it easier to achieve the full transition to wakefulness when the moment comes. And people who are allowed to wake naturally without alarms often report feeling more refreshed than those who are interrupted mid-cycle, the body having had time to complete its preparations rather than being forced to skip ahead, muscles warming, heart rate climbing, awareness slowly surfacing like a diver returning to the light from the depths below. The body warms itself awake in anticipation of the day. Cortisol surges in the early morning to help you feel alert. As dawn approaches, the adrenal glands receive a signal from the brain to begin releasing cortisol in increasing amounts, a surge known as the cortisol awakening response that peaks about 30 minutes after you open your eyes and serves to mobilize energy, sharpen concentration and focus, and prepare the immune system for the challenges ahead. And this hormonal lift is part of the reason mornings feel different from evenings, the body primed by chemistry to face the world rather than retreat from it. And when this surge is blunted by chronic stress or disrupted sleep, mornings can feel sluggish and difficult, the chemical push that should propel you into action arriving too weakly to overcome the inertia of rest, leaving you struggling to find the energy that should come naturally with the rising sun. The chemistry of dawn is designed for action. The final sleep cycle is often the lightest, easing the transition to wakefulness. By the time the last sleep cycle of the night arrives, the proportion of deep slow-wave sleep has declined, and the stage is dominated by light sleep and REM, a combination that makes arousal easier and the transition to waking smoother. And this natural lightening of sleep toward morning is one reason why late rising can feel so effortless compared to early alarms that catch you in deeper stages, the brain having already done much of the work of separating from sleep. Consciousness rising naturally toward the surface like a bubble ascending through water, the final dreams fading as awareness returns, the body primed and ready, the internal chemistry already shifting, and the mind hovering in that gentle liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, the world waiting patiently for your return. The surface calls before you choose to answer. Morning dreams are often the most vivid and memorable. Because the proportion of REM sleep increases with each successive cycle, the longest and most intense periods of dreaming occur in the final hours before waking. And these late-night dreams are the ones most likely to be recalled upon awakening, their imagery still fresh and their narratives often elaborate and rich with emotional significance and detail. And for many people, the dreams remembered best are those that were unfolding at the moment the alarm rang or the eyes naturally opened, caught in the act before they had time to fade. And this is why dream journals work best when filled in immediately upon waking, before the fragile traces of the dream dissolve into the demands of the day, the dream world yielding to the waking world like mist dissolving in morning sun. The morning holds the longest and most vivid dreams of the entire night. The brain has been awake, in a sense, all along, working tirelessly through the night. Though consciousness slips away as you fall asleep, the brain itself never truly rests, its activity shifting from the outward-facing tasks of waking life to the inward-facing maintenance that sleep alone can provide. And if you were to watch a recording of brain activity through the night, you would see not stillness, but ceaseless motion, waves rising and falling, regions flickering in and out of synchrony, networks replaying and reorganizing. A performance as complex as any waking hour, though hidden from the audience of awareness. And by morning, this tireless worker will have accomplished tasks no conscious effort could replicate, leaving you refreshed and ready for another day, while remembering nothing of the labor performed on your behalf throughout the quiet hours of darkness. The brain knows no true sleep, only a different kind of work. Every night, the brain performs this extraordinary act of self-renewal. Night after night, without instruction or conscious effort, the brain accomplishes a feat of renewal that science is only beginning to understand in its full complexity, clearing waste, consolidating memory, processing emotion, repairing tissue, and preparing for the day ahead. A nightly ritual so reliable that most people never think to appreciate it or pause to marvel at its quiet perfection. And yet this cycle of restoration is the foundation upon which every waking moment is built. The invisible work that makes thought and feeling and action possible. And as you lie here now, this same process is already beginning within you, the brain settling into its quiet labor while you drift toward rest, welcoming you into the ancient rhythm of restoration that has sustained every human who ever lived on this earth. Self-renewal is the gift that every night bestows. And so the brain carries you gently into another night of quiet transformation. As the final thoughts of the day begin to soften and the edges of awareness grow hazy, the brain is already preparing for its most sacred work. The billions of neurons that have carried you through waking hours, now turning inward to tend to tasks that consciousness cannot witness. And somewhere in the folds of your cortex, the events of this very day are being sorted and stored, while somewhere deeper still, the glymphatic rivers are beginning to flow, washing away the metabolic debris that accumulated through all those hours of thought and feeling and effort. And the memories worth keeping are being woven into the fabric of who you are, strengthening, stabilizing, becoming part of your permanent self. And all of this will happen without your awareness, without your effort, a gift freely given by the organ that makes you who you are. Tonight, as every night, the brain will care for you while you rest. And now the quiet wonders of the sleeping brain begin to gently fade into the stillness of this very night. We have traveled through the architecture of sleep, from the first slow waves that carry you beneath the surface to the vivid theaters of REM. We have witnessed the glymphatic rivers that cleanse your mind, the gentle pruning of memories no longer needed, and the silent rehearsals that prepare you for the days ahead. From the rhythms of your circadian clock to the paralysis that keeps you safe while you dream, every process is part of a delicate choreography, a performance that happens without applause in the privacy of your own skull. If these gentle facts brought peace to your evening, perhaps leave a like to let us know, or subscribe so we can continue these journeys together. There are more wonders waiting, more quiet discoveries to share, one sleepy soul at a time. Right now, as you lie here, your brain is already beginning its nightly work. Somewhere in the folds of your cortex, the events of this day are being sorted and stored. Somewhere deeper still, your body is preparing to restore itself, to strengthen, to heal. You are not merely resting, you are being rebuilt, molecule by molecule, thought by thought. Let your eyes grow heavy if they have not already. Let your breathing become slow and even like waves lapping against a distant shore. Feel the tension in your shoulders and let it dissolve. Feel the grip of your jaw soften. Feel your hands become weightless against the sheets. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to solve. The brain knows how to care for you. All you must do is let go. Tonight, as you rest, your brain will continue its quiet work. It will carry the fragments of this day into the chambers of memory. It will cleanse itself of what no longer serves you. It will rehearse the movements you have learnt, sharpen the skills you have practiced, and perhaps weave a dream or two from the threads of your thoughts. The neurons will fire and fall silent in slow, rhythmic waves. The hormones will rise and fall in their ancient patterns. And you, the conscious self who has listened to these facts, will drift below the surface, trusting in the wisdom of a brain that never truly sleeps. You are a small, warm presence resting within the vast cathedral of your own mind, peacefully held among its wonders. Sleep well, sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow knowing that even in the stillness of the night, you were never truly alone. The brain was there, working gently through the darkness, preparing you for another day. This has been Drowsy Discovery. Good night.